Christy, we've talked a lot about, we heard State Senator Scott Winter speak about kind of transit. We all know transit and housing intersect. Which is more broken in San Francisco, transit or housing?
That's a difficult question to answer because they are so intertwined and because they're both so broken in many ways. And I think the common thread is that we have a community process in San Francisco that really welcomes anybody's voice, and there are a lot of opportunities for projects to get stalled, whether they are individual housing projects or whether they are transportation projects. We have transportation projects that get held up by lawsuits under our Environmental Quality Act, and that's just counterintuitive. These are things that are supposed to be reducing our impact on the environment, and we have too many tools for people who want to stop things from changing that they're able to use. So I guess I would say they're both difficult. I think transportation's harder because transit is harder because there's, I think on the housing, there's like a certain point where you have the private market is getting deeply involved, and while there are private contractors involved in the transit, I think there's just a lot more, it's a slower process to build the transit line, I think. I don't know, maybe Josh has something different to add on that, but I think both are challenged in the same ways, and transit just takes longer than a housing development.
Josh, you want to weigh in or add anything?
I would agree with that. I mean, I think it takes massive public investment and taxpayer dollars in that to really build a transit system, whereas, you know, on the housing side, it's both sides of the ledger, and you can probably move it faster in some respects. Although, you know, we can look to cities like Seattle and Los Angeles, which have recently, just in the last couple of years, both cities have adopted massive bonds that the voters agree to in the orders of tens of billions of dollars for massive transit programs that they can start building out their transit systems fast. So if you can sell this big vision, then you can maybe convince the voters to pony up big dollars, and then we can really start to get things moving. But we haven't really done that quite yet in the Bay Area to put that vision forward to the voters to really get that going.
So you mentioned Seattle and Los Angeles, and I think one of the challenges we are aware of here in San Francisco is this tension between allowing community input on development and the approval of a development. And I don't want to make that your responsibility. You're not the one who makes the rules. You just have to deal with those that are made. But if we were to look at other cities, or you're sitting there and planning and looking at other cities and thinking, gosh, it would be easy to have a job in this city because the way they go about approving things makes a lot more sense. What might some of those cities be?
Well, I would go back to Seattle, and it's not because of what the city of Seattle is doing, but it's because of what the state of Washington is doing, and really, now Senator Wiener is really pushing this at the state level in California, because in the state of Washington, as in the state of Oregon, they have state level growth control mandates that came out of the same era of the 1970s environmental movement, which here just resulted in a requirement to do environmental impact reports, which ultimately slows things down. But in those states, it also resulted in a state housing framework where the state sort of has a lot of teeth in mandating certain levels of housing production by region, and then the regional bodies then kind of allocate it to cities, and then the cities basically have to rezone themselves to accommodate that housing. And if they don't do that, and if they don't entitle the housing, then there are major hammers that the state brings down on them, including cutting off all sorts of financial streams to the cities. And generally that has created an environment where the cities don't even think about crossing that line. And so it would be a lot easier for us as planners, because rather than saying to a neighborhood, let's talk about whether there should be growth here, and then if so, how should it look? It's like, okay, we have to plan for X number of units in the city, or X number of units in this neighborhood. Let's figure out how it should look and how it should be shaped, not whether it should happen. And so it's a completely different environment.
So can I add something about infrastructure? I'm sorry. But the thing is, I know, for example, in San Francisco, because, we've mentioned that it's easier for the private sector to get things moving, the city is looking at alternative ways to fund what we call capital projects, right? Such as public-private partnerships, the P3, Doyle Drive was a P3, or maybe considering infrastructure funds. We're not serious about that yet, but Chicago's tried to do it. So I can tell you that San Francisco is looking at other ways to fund public infrastructure projects now.
I just wanted to add with Seattle, in comparison to San Francisco, where most projects go to our planning commission to get approved, in Seattle, their planning commission really focuses on policies and is only looking at things like their big plans and more important policy. And projects go to local design review boards in order to get their final stamp of approval. So I think that because of the way we're set up, we also allow for that to slow down.
And Todd, I noticed you were nodding your head as people were mentioning Seattle. Have anything you want to highlight or notice or have seen there that is worth mentioning from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think Seattle is, I think, a fairly similar type of city to San Francisco from a demographic point of view, a lot of technology. I think it's about the same number of residents, I think around 800,000. A one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco is about $3,500 a month. A one-bedroom apartment in Seattle is about $1,800 a month. So they are doing something perhaps better than we are.
I think it's all those ads telling people from California not to move there, right?
If I could add, if we built, estimating, what number of apartments would you say were built in the last 5 years in San Francisco?
In the last 5 years?
Yeah, ballpark or 3 years.
I mean, so take out 2016, before that, I'd say 7,500, so maybe about 11,000 if 2016.
11,000. So I think they built about twice that amount in Seattle, if not more. The odd thing, though, which is true all across the West Coast, only less than 10% of what's being built in San Diego, LA, here, Seattle are condominiums, just because of liability issues, but also because of financing and cost of construction.
So if less than 10% of what's being built is condos, what is the 90? Is the 90% multifamily or so?
All multifamily.
Wow, and is that kind of a historic flip or inversion? I mean, that seems like an abnormally high number of multifamily.
It has flipped. It used to be not as dramatic the other way in terms of 90% condos, but it was a more balanced percentage of condos and apartments.
Gotcha. So Christy, another kind of question for you is, as we've been talking about like present and how we got into this situation, Senator Wiener definitely highlighted some of the attitudes. From Spur's point of view as kind of a research group and think tank, was there one law or moment that, really led to where we are now, or was it a bunch of small things, or was it the law of unintended consequences, or kind of what are your thoughts about what exactly got us here?
Sure. I think it is many different things. It is all the trends and bad habits that Senator Wiener talked about in terms of not building over. We have a severe deficit at this point. It's a long trend of not building enough. I think that we have actually talked about having a housing crisis or housing shortage many times over the last few decades. Like it comes back. We sort of are in a perpetual housing crisis. I found a Spur newsletter from 15 or 20 years ago that could have been written today. And so I think it's sort of always eternal here. It's always been expensive here. I do think that this is different, and part of it is, I think, just due to the economy, due to the Bay Area, the strength of the tech sector right now, and that there is sort of this long sustained demand for living in this area, combined with sort of the broader national trends of there being more interest in living in urban environments. And that combined with our long-term trends, it makes for a very difficult situation where it's not just impacting low-income households. I think it's probably been a struggle for low-income households to live in the Bay Area for a very long time, and now it is just creeping up the income spectrum, and so more and more people who never thought that they'd be impacted are feeling the effects, who are having trouble remaining here. A lot of the, core workers, people that we need to have to, in all kinds of industries, are teachers are a big one that people are talking about. You never would have thought that you would need to think about subsidizing teachers to remain in San Francisco. And we are at that point right now where it is, it's very pressing for everyone. Everyone is touched by it, knows someone who's been touched by it. And so I think it's all those things together heading in the same direction that I think are the explanation for the crisis. There's no one thing that's created it.
Great. Todd?
Yeah, I think it's pretty significant that, just I think a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, that it came out that if you're a family of four in San Francisco and you're making $106,000 a year, that you are considered low income. Like, that is a significant, getting over that six-figure mark for a family of four to be considered low income, like that, it affects everyone, even if you're not in that category, everyone can kind of relate to that. Like, that doesn't sound like that's not making a living wage. Like, that sounds...
Everywhere else in America, when you've got your six-figure salary, like, you made it, right?
Yeah. And so I think that is also what kind of subconsciously we're feeling as a city, that everyone kind of feels, wow, it is just really expensive to live here right now.
So from your, if there was one thing, like, there's lots of things we can do, but the one most important thing you would start with in terms of making more housing in San Francisco, and I'll start with Todd.
I mean, it's a very complicated problem, and I honestly, like, if I just say like one thing, like, we need to make sure that we're voting for the right pro-housing leadership and voting for pro-housing policies. If there's one thing that to be done, there's a lot, not making sure that it's not just NIMBYs who are showing up to neighborhood meetings and showing up to the Board of Supervisors at 11 a.m. on a Thursday, right? I mean, there's processes that are in place through the political process that make it difficult to kind of be a true urbanist, as Scott was saying, about, like, building more densely, having more transportation. I mean, there's all these things that I think we as San Franciscans, we value. We're environmentalists, we're inclusive, we value diversity. Well, you're gonna get that if you build more density, if you invest in transportation, you invest in your public schools, and the way we do that is by voting for the right people. So,
and I think one of the debates we've always had along those lines is, do we want to make more housing and San Francisco will look different, or do we preserve San Francisco, the visual identity? And for decades, the preference has been to preserve our visual identity at great cost.
yeah, pouring amber over the city is not a planning process. I mean, there is nothing magical about the day that Tim Redmond showed up in San Francisco in 1970 to say, like, this is the perfect thing of what San Francisco is. I mean, cities evolve. Right? And if you think that the moment you walked into the city that's perfect, well, then you're blocking a lot of other people who also would like to move to the city. You came here for a reason. Other people want to come here. And by saying no to them, that doesn't make you very inclusive from my point of view.
Just a funny note on that. I had a conversation just a week or two ago with a community activist who said that 2009, when he moved here, was when San Francisco was the perfect, and he's upset about the changes since 2009. Found that really...
I actually think it was a Wednesday in 2011, but really.
But I think, even if you look at a city that we love, let's say Paris, I mean, a lot of it does not change in the center, but you look at surrounding Paris, there's still a huge amount of growth. And I do think, okay, maybe some of our classic old neighborhoods won't be touched, but if you look at, there's a lot more that could be built south of Market, Central Corridor, Mark Leno had lobbied a long time for increase in height along Market Street, and it has happened due to a lot of people's effort. But then I look at Geary Boulevard. It's not the prettiest boulevard, but that is a place where there should be high rises. It's some of the best public transportation, but yet it's a conundrum to try to get that done.
Christy, from your point of view as Spur, like what would be the one magic bullet if there was such a thing?
You know, I'm actually not a very political person, but I think that what Todd said is true. I mean, I think that there are a lot of people in San Francisco who do not oppose housing and who do not oppose things changing a little bit. And when it comes down to it, most people's neighborhoods only need to change a little bit for more people to be able to live here at an affordable level. And so I think that for people to be able to speak up proactively when there is something in your neighborhood that is going to get approved, and support it, for people to vote for policies, to vote for politicians who are trying to push for the right things. I think that's really important. Educating other people is really important. Participating in planning processes when there's an area plan that's happening. The voices of ordinary people who are not, being paid to pay attention mean a lot in the city, and I think it's really important that we work on making that a bigger thing.
Darlene, do you want to, from the conversations you have, what's your perspective?
I think the city of innovation, I think even when it comes to real estate and building housing in particular, I think we should consider being more innovative, especially when you think about costs. And I think that in this town, especially with the market all of a sudden going this way, that I think in many ways everybody's getting greedy, and it's not just the developers, it's not just, but even the contractors and even union, they're asking for more and more money. But when you talk about affordable housing, let's be innovative. Let's think about prefab. Let that happen. And I'm not saying that you're taking jobs from anyone else, or but it's just that you're able to build faster and then move on to the next project. So why can't people just think outside the box and just allow more building to happen?
I'm with you. Do millennials have a future in San Francisco as homeowners? Maybe. Did anyone want to touch that one?
I feel sorry for my sons. They're living, it's 4 people, they're living in an apartment in Laurel Heights, right? And 2 couples, they're not married, but okay, 2 couples, they're living in an apartment, 2-bedroom. I'm like, how do you guys do that? But they're all doing that. They're not thinking of getting married yet, but they figure, hey, we can do this, and we're going to do that for as long as we can. And the place is probably about $4,000. I don't know how they're going to do it. When they think about getting married, are they going to be able to stay in the city, or they're going to have to move out? And if they do, where do they move to?
I think it's very difficult, but in the 90s, no one under 30 really ever bought condominiums. And now we've really seen in this decade, so many buyers are mid-20s, starting mid-20s and purchase to early 30s. Classic millennials. 1 out of 2 show up with their parents to a marketing center, and that's true whether they're from the Bay Area or parents are from San Diego, parents are in from Asia. And so 1 out of 2 show up with their parents, 1 out of 3 get their down payment from part of the down payment from their parents, and 1 out of 5 have their parents on the loan application. So it's also a generation of baby boomers who, 1, want to help their children, and 2, since the recession, don't want to have all their money in the stock market. So that's the only way, is really with parental assistance.
What does Spur see when they look at the future of San Francisco and who's going to be living here?
Our board did some scenario planning at our last retreat, sort of looking broadly at the region and thinking about different directions that both the city and the region might go. And unfortunately, I think we're not going to go with the bleak future, but I think that where people are mostly drawn to is worrying about that we have this dystopia of a place where only the high-income people and a few lucky low-income people who qualify and win the lottery to live in subsidized housing will be in San Francisco. I'd like to think that we can do better than that, but I think it's difficult to think about how you get the broad swath of the middle class to be able to afford and live in San Francisco without some drastic changes to how we approve and build housing. We don't have enough money to subsidize all the low-income households and moderate-income households in San Francisco. And it's really, if it continues to be a desirable place for people with higher incomes, we need to find a way to grow faster than we have been.